Today is August 9th. We're at the home of Dr. Robert Freeman in North Carolina, talking to him about his life and specifically his service to Glenville State College. Hello, Dr. Freeman.
Hey, how you doing, Jason?
Good. Can you give me your full name?
I'm Robert Noble Freeman.
Okay. And where were you born and raised, sir?
I was born and raised in rural Middle Tennessee, around the town of near the town of Pulaski, Tennessee.
Okay.
It's about 12, 15 miles from the Alabama border.
Okay. And what can you describe a little bit about your parents?
My dad was a sharecropper. Unfortunately, in those days, if you were a kid, you got the opportunity to stay home. You didn't have to go to school. So my dad basically went through the second grade, and my mother had gone through the sixth grade. But my dad was a farmer, and farmed until I was about 11, and at which point he moved to Nashville to work for a subsidiary of the post office, and that's where he worked till I went off to college, and then he moved out to Texas, and subsequently he and Mom had both passed away out there.
Okay. So your mother had spent the majority of her time as a homemaker there?
She was a housewife.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, she's a housewife and a mother, and on a farm everybody works. So she was probably did as much work in the garden. She kept the garden, and you grew your food or hunted it to some extent. So she raised the garden and raised a bunch of kids.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your early schooling. When did you initially start school? And
I started school at a little 3-room schoolhouse in near the farm where we lived in the metropolis of Brick Church, Tennessee, which had 2 stores, one of which was closed. But it was a 3-room schoolhouse, and grades 1, 2, and 3 were in one room. 4, 5, and 6 was in a second room, and 7 and 8 were in a third room. And the person who taught 7 and 8 was also the principal of that school. That's where I started. Mrs. Harrison was my first grade teacher, probably one of the few teachers whose name I still remember. But it was an interesting way to study, because if you were in the first grade, you were also hearing second grade and third grade stuff. So you were kind of getting 3 years all at once, and then as you went to the second grade, you got a repeat of that other, so you learned it pretty well during that time.
Okay. So you would have continued through school and graduated high school?
When I was about, as I say, when I was about 10, 11, 12, we moved to Nashville, and I entered the 7th grade in Nashville, and that was probably the biggest cultural shock I'd ever experienced, because I'd gone from a 3-room schoolhouse where basically everybody was kind of like me. We were all farm kids and so forth, and I went to a comprehensive K-12 education facility, and that was the first time I ever realized I was poor, because all of a sudden I was in an environment like I'd never seen before, and that was cultural shock right there. But I moved to Nashville and enrolled in Howard High School, and graduated from there a few years later, and went off to Middle Tennessee State University.
Okay. Can you describe what initiated you to further your education?
Well, and my parents didn't have a lot of education, but for some reason, and I don't have the answer to where they came up with that, but they realized that education was a way to do better. And so they encouraged us to go to school. They encouraged us to do well, and honestly, school was easy for me. So if something is easy and you have some success at it, it's something you try to do. And so having some success in school, I kept on doing it. And I admired my teachers in high school, and I didn't know what I wanted to be, but I knew I kind of wanted to go to college if I could, and so I had that opportunity.
Okay. So you went to, you said Eastern Tennessee?
Middle Tennessee.
Middle Tennessee.
Middle Tennessee State University. With that time, it was Middle Tennessee State College. I was in the first graduating class where they changed it over to university, and I went there because I got a football scholarship.
Oh, I see.
And so I went there thinking I was going to be the greatest football player that had ever played, and realized when I got there, there were a lot of bigger, quicker, faster people who also were gonna be the greatest football players they'd ever been. But football paid for my college, so and that would be one of the few ways I could have gone, was that, and then, and I got into forensics there too, public speaking and that sort of thing, which was a lot of fun to do.
Okay, so you'd initially entered kind of undecided.
Didn't quite know what I wanted to be,
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't. I was a history major because I enjoyed history and so forth, but didn't quite know what I wanted to be. After a couple of years, I decided I wanted to be a college professor because that looked like a pretty good job. And I think it probably is. I think it probably is the best job around. So I decided at that point that I wanted to be a history professor.
Okay, so you just got your BA there.
I got a BA and a master's degree there.
Oh, okay, I see.
Because I took the I was my major in colonial history, and in my senior year, I went ahead and added the few courses in student taught, so I'd have teaching as kind of a drop back position. And then I took a master's fellowship there and stayed and did a master's in colonial history there. And really, it was funny. I'd had an opportunity then to go to University of North Carolina to do PhD work in colonial history. There were a couple of major professors who were at North Carolina who were big leaders in the field of colonial history at that time.
Okay.
And so I planned to go there until I got a notice from my draft board to report for a physical.
Okay, and what year would that have been?
That would have been late 67, early 68. And I called my draft board and said, it's got to be a mistake. I'm in school, and I'm married, and I have a son. I mean, I'm golden. And they said, no. At that time, Tennessee, I guess, was under court order to go into the protected pools because there'd been a court case, they had been drafting too many minorities. And so as a result of that court decision, they went into the protected pools, and my number came up. And so I took the physical, and I was warm and breathing, and so I knew I was going to be classified 1A, which meant at that time Army, more than likely. And I had a half brother who was in the Navy from my mother's first marriage when her husband died, and I called him and said, I'm going to get drafted. I'd like to go in the Navy as opposed to the Army. Is anything that I could do? And he said, well, what do you want to do in the Navy? And I said, well, I don't know, maybe fly airplanes. I'd kind of like to do that. Just because I've never done it, I like to do it. And so he said, well, let me see what he could do. And so I got a call back about the next week and said I was to report to Millington Air Station in Memphis to take a flight physical. And if I passed the physical and everything, then I'd be sworn in the Navy, and I was. That's the picture you see here with my hand in the air. That's me being sworn into the Navy.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Well, stepping back just a hair, where had you met your wife?
I had met her at Middle Tennessee. She had been a student at Middle Tennessee, and so I met her, and when I was late sophomore, junior, and we had married in the summer before I started the master's degree.
Okay. All right. And when was you have how many children?
Yeah, we have two. Two.
And the first was born?
Was born in September '68, and then had a daughter in '72. Unfortunately, that marriage dissolved in the early '80s, unfortunately, but had two great kids, so that was good.
Okay. Well, moving forward then, how'd the military treat you?
It was good. I enjoyed it. The time in the military, we went to OCS at Pensacola, and then did flight school down there, and enjoyed flying. It was exciting at the time. So that part was good. And unfortunately, I had a hydraulic failure on an airplane, and when I ejected, I tore up my right knee. And the Navy said the knee is really not reliable for flying. So they gave me two choices at that point. transfer you to the line Navy, because I was a lieutenant at that point.
Mhm.
They said, or we can send you home on a medical, because they were decreasing numbers because Vietnam was winding down and so forth. And so I took the medical and went home.
And you spent the whole term of your service in the United States?
Yeah, I had. I mean, I basically was still doing training stuff. You know, I'd been in such war-torn areas as Meridian, Mississippi, and Biloxi, and had been at Corpus Christi, and had been in San Diego, and some other stuff. I had orders when I was hurt. I had orders to Vietnam. I was stationed on the Kitty Hawk and the squadron there, and actually flew an airplane back to Pensacola so I could see the family. And when we got ready to head back, took off, had the hydraulic failure, and the rest of it is what it is.
Well, upon your exit from the military, what did you decide to do?
Well, I returned to Chattanooga, which is where the wife and son were, and needed a job. And so I had two choices. My mother-in-law at that time was in the school system, and she got me in an interview with the curriculum director, and said the two choices that I had for a job were teaching physics at an all African-American high school, and I had, I don't know, maybe 12 hours of physics in college, or teaching history in a center for severely emotionally disturbed students, which was just getting started. And that looked like the better choice, and it paid $200 more a month. So I started working with severely emotionally disturbed teenagers, trying to do some school, a place called the Tennessee Re-Education Center, and work with those students.
Were there any disabilities involved in that?
Yeah, we had all sorts of things. We had, obviously the emotionally disturbed was the label that people were carrying, behavior disordered. We had, obviously kids with LD problems. We had some, we call them bipolar kids now. You know, we had a lot of kids who were either post-drug use or into drugs and so forth. So it was a challenging group of people. And here I just came out of the Navy, had the short haircut, the ramrod back straight, you know, and here are these long-haired kids who knew a lot more about my mother than I did, and they shared it on a continuing basis with me. But they were very brave kids. I mean, it takes a lot of courage for a youngster to reject the system, because the system comes down on them hard, and the system did. But I know that it was during the time working with these students.
And these were high school age?
These were high school age, 13 to 17 age. But it was working with them that I realized that, well, as you explained, this program took the approach of the students were put in a residential center where we did schooling. They had a community component that worked with them at night and tried to socialize in the community. And also the parents underwent counseling. And when we were ready to place a youngster back, we worked with the school where they were going back, because what we determined at that time was that it didn't do any good to take a student out of this environment, get them where they were operating appropriately in the new environment, put them back in the old place, because they're going to do the same stuff. And so we tried to make those changes, but I realized during that time that part of the problem was that the kids were in straits because the parents were having problems, and those problems could vary from in different kind of things. But so I went back to went to Nashville, to Vanderbilt University, and did a master's in clinical psychology, and then I actually wound up practicing, doing marriage and sexuality counseling for a while, which was interesting, but it was kind of hard to maintain that over time, because I found myself becoming inattentive, because someone would come in and you'd heard this before, so it was almost like a number one or a number two. So I decided that I'd always wanted to be a college professor, and if I was going to do it, I should get back at it. So in 1973-4, I went to the University of Tennessee and enrolled in the doctoral program there, and completed the doctorate degree there.
What was the specialization?
I did focused on special education kids, because I was looking at a lot of disabilities,
Mm-hmm.
and had a lot of psychology in that as well, but really focused on special ed. My interest was what's the experience that kids who aren't being successful in school, how's their experience different from other kids, and how is that impacting them later in life? So I did a lot of work with special ed kids, and graduated with a doctorate in special ed curriculum, basically, and took my first job at Bowling Green State University up in Ohio as a special ed professor, and was there for 4 years as a special ed professor, and then came back down to Georgia Southern, as the chairman of their department there, and
Their education department, or?
of the special ed department,
Okay.
and did that for several years, and then became the associate dean there, and then actually was interim dean for a year. And I think I was at Southern about 13 years all told, and then moved to Augusta State University as the dean of the College of Education there, and stayed there.
That would have been.
That'd been
when?
let's see, that would have been in '92.
Okay.
That right?
And then-
Yeah, about '92.
So prior to that, your first marriage had dissolved, and
Yeah.
and you were you.
I met Sandy in Statesboro when I was at Georgia Southern, and Sandy and I were married in 1987, and have remained so, amazingly, we've remained so all this time. I'm a pretty lucky guy, so I'm pretty fortunate. But yeah, we married in '87, and yeah, then I was at Augusta State there as dean of education, and had some successes there, and then actually retired from the university system of Georgia there. As I say, I bought my military time and some public school time that I'd had working with the emotionally disturbed kids, and got the opportunity to come to Glenville, and went up there as vice president and provost.
Okay, and we talked earlier a little bit, but could you go over that again? I mean, what you'd retired, and you'd pursued. You just figured, well, you'd mentioned that you thought, well, let's see something new.
Well, what I had done is I decided to retire, but I was still working because I hadn't retired yet. And my initial thought was I just want to go teach someplace. Now in Georgia, if you retire, you can't stay in the system, so you have to leave the university system.
Mm-hmm.
Now I could have gone to a private school and taught and so forth, but we just decided we'd like to go someplace different. You know, we've been in Georgia really for a very long time, and so we applied to several schools, and as faculty, and also a couple as vice president and provost. And Glenville was an interesting place for us because it was small and kind of rural, and it was pretty. It was a new place to us.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never been to West Virginia before until I went up for the interview. But I got a call from Jim Hilgenberg, who was the chairman of the search committee for the provost, and was invited up to Glenville for the interview.
Mm-hmm.
And
This would have been very early in 2000.
this would have been 2002.
2002.
Yeah, 2002. Either late 2002 or early 2003. Is that right? No, early. It would have been 2002.
Early 2000.
Early 2002. Yeah. And so we went up and interviewed, and were given the offer to come, and so we came back to Augusta and closed up affairs there, and moved to Glenville in the fall of '02.
Okay. What was your first impressions?
Well, my first impression of Glenville was we love the beauty of the place. I mean, it sits on the side of the mountain, and it's actually gorgeous. My concern was it had a lot of boarded up buildings, and that boarded up buildings is a sign of a dying place. And so I was a little nervous about that. But we love the people. The people that I met, the administrators, the faculty, the staff, we really felt a connection with them. And with my background, I really felt like it was a good fit for me in a small area, and the role of provost and vice president was one that I felt very comfortable in looking at. I'd been a dean and done all, my background in academia is kind of the traditional. You were faculty, you were a department chair, you were a dean, and you were, the vice president's kind of the next level to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt very comfortable handling the academic side of a campus. And so it looked like an interesting place, looked like it had some challenges that might give us a little bit of work, and it turned out it did.
How well aware were you of the challenges that were being, specifically the challenges coming from Charleston? Initially, how aware?
Not terribly,
Mm-hmm.
because in my vetting of Glenville for my own information, one of the things that what you would do today, you'd go in and Google it, and it would bring up all of this stuff. At that time, that facility wasn't there as strongly as it is now. We had some inkling, but having been in academia a long time, legislators are always doing that. I had asked then President Powell about this, and I think it was his feeling that something was going to blow over. He wasn't, at least when he interviewed me in early 2002, he was not, I would say concerned, but not overly concerned that this wasn't something that the campus couldn't deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say I walked into that not completely ignorant, but with, it hit pretty hard when it hit us.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you were only in the provost position for a few months.
I was in it for a year.
For about a year.
I was in it about a year, because at the beginning, really truly at the beginning of my second year there, I was the interim president by that time, because Dr. Powell had left and we'd gone through, the search process, and so I had taken, I guess it would have been in the late spring or early summer of 2003 when I took the interim presidency.
Okay. And Dr. Powell would have actually, I think he announced his departure in December of 2002.
Yes, correct. He did.
And how did that strike you?
I was surprised, because Dr. Powell's initial thoughts were, when I was interviewing with him, that he was going to be there 3, 4, 5 years. But things change,
Mm-hmm.
and so I was surprised. I was concerned. I actually thought about tendering my resignation as well, just because I thought, well, if I don't want to go through all this changes and so forth, so what I'll do is, I'm already retired, I'll just finish out this year, and then we had property down here, we'll just move back down here.
Do you feel like you were somewhat viewed from the campus community and the outside community as being attached to Dr. Powell?
I think so, because my view of a second in command, which is what I was at that particular point, was I will give him all the feedback I possibly can, but I'm not going to go out and badmouth him.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to externally, I'm going to be quiet or supportive, one of the others. I'm not going to badmouth him. Now, he and I may have long discussions about stuff that I feel are inappropriate, or maybe we can do things differently and so forth. And Tom and I had those kind of conversations. To his credit, I think he listened to my thoughts. He didn't always do what I wanted, but no one does. But I think we got along, very well.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, his mind was focused on leaving Glenville and finishing up what he needed to finish up and get to St. Mary's. That's always a very difficult transition time. Even when I was retiring, the last 6 months was very difficult, because you're trying to not do anything less, but at the same time you're pulled in this other direction.
Mm-hmm.
As you're making plans in another direction.
You would have came in at a very, very, around within a year of a major transition. Some people call it a rebranding of West Virginia's higher education. Is there anything you'd like to say about that? You were actually the first president that would have been hired through the Board of Governors. I guess there was a search committee, but it was probably made up by a lot of the board members.
It was, the Board of Governors, they had been in place a year or so, and when the search was done, it was directed by a person from the Board of Governors. And so I worked with them, through the search process. As we looked at other candidates, I wasn't a candidate in that process. I was asked to be a candidate by a couple of folks, but I didn't feel it was appropriate. I had only been at Glenville months at that particular point, and I didn't particularly have any interest in being a president, but particularly didn't feel like I had enough of a background to do what needed done at that particular point. So the Board of Governors, went through a process of trying to find a candidate, and it was unsuccessful, as it turned out that time.
Okay, and another very, potentially one of the most trying times is maybe how I'll describe it, trying or, most, difficult times in GSC's history, at least in the last, 50 so years, was, early on in 2003, directly right after Dr. Powell announced his resignation. He was still president, I guess, until the end of the school year, or the end of the fiscal year, something like that.
End of the school year, yeah.
But there was, in January of 2003, the West Virginia's, I believe it was the House, passed a bill for closure. And it was sent on to the Senate, where it was changed drastically. Can you talk a little bit about that and how, those, that's a brief period of time, but, it's a major thing that happened.
Well, it obviously was traumatic during that time. Dr. Powell directed most of the fight in Charleston. He, along with some other people, coordinated the vast majority of that. And my function during that time particularly was to kind of run the college while Dr. Powell was off fighting the war. He was spending a tremendous amount of time in Charleston, going back and forth. He and I talked throughout that time, so that he kind of kept me up to date about what was happening. But for the most part, that 03, that early 03 fight, Dr. Powell directed that and mobilized our forces, and the bill changed so that basically what Glenville wound up doing was losing its community and technical college connection, because that was at the same time they were putting the community and technical college system together. And so rather than closure, what Glenville got was limitations, basically.
Could you comment, or do you believe that the transition, I believe from what you said before, you do believe that the transition, West Virginia, the transition away from community colleges being associated with their parent institutions, was something that was happening it was basically going to happen no matter what, had been in plans for years. Can you say anything about that and the fact of how that played into the closure part of it? Do you believe, how is that connected?
Well, I think what happens a lot with legislation is the legislators start out with a broad palette of a lot of changes that they probably in their minds thought was a pretty good move. As the political realities and the allies and the enemies line up against each other, you start to limit that legislation down to what you can get passed. And so closure and the community college system together, I think, was probably too big a nut. And Dr. Powell and the Board of Governors, Marge and Billy Burke were very instrumental in doing that. Marge had been in the legislature. She had a lot of friends. And so she was able to work and fight some of that stuff. But in my mind, the separation was going to happen regardless, because that was kind of a trend at that time in the country, and West Virginia had been moving kind of in that direction for years, and with stops and starts. And so finally that decision had been made that separation was gonna happen. There was gonna be a community and technical college.
So in your opinion, there was nothing that could have stopped?
Absolutely nothing. I don't, I think Dr. Powell fought valiantly for the campus, and to keep it from closing, and I think was successful with Mrs. Burke and Mr. Burke and all these other folks. I don't think there was anything possible that he could have done to have prevented the separation of the Nicholas County campus from us.
And from what I understand, we did receive a, somewhat hefty sum because of that, at least to make up for.
We received some money. It wasn't, I wouldn't use the word hefty. I honestly don't remember the exact amount, but it wasn't a hefty contribution. We did get some, because I think we had, what they gave us money for was, we were providing services off the main campus to Nicholas County. We were providing registrar services, we were providing counseling service, developmental studies. We had a lot of shared services, and somehow the cost of those services were tabulated in some way, and we got that money back to the main campus. So what we had been using main campus people to do, I think we got compensated for that, from that loss. But and my memory is vague on this, Jason, but it seems like we had something like $8 million that was committed to the technical college, or was getting for that. That we lost a good hunk of that when we lost those faculty and lost those staff and so forth. And we got some back, but we never got the corpus of that back.
Okay. And, including even things, from what I understand, we were, stopping the library there and a lot of other things.
Yeah, we were. Basically what Glenville was doing was making that truly a community and technical college. Our plans had been to, such that a student in that area could do their first couple of years there and then transfer up to the main campus for, and in some cases in high interest coursework or high volume coursework, our plans were to take courses down there. We, for example, had plans to take a major in early childhood education down to the Nicholas County campus. That didn't happen with the separation, but those were the kind of plans that we were putting in place to integrate those two campuses together.
So from the push of legislation, what had began as basically just, maybe branch campus offerings or something considered of that, evolved into what the legislators were envisioning. I mean, they were.
I think so. As we talked about earlier, I think the legislature saw the technical college aspect much stronger than they did the community college aspect. They wanted technical college, where a person was learning auto mechanics and air conditioning and other skills that they could then go directly into the workforce. Which is what the technical college aspect does. The community college part of that, which was the academic side of it, the Englishes and the sciences and the histories and those kind of things, I think the legislature was a little indistinct about their thinking on that. They were just more concerned with the technical side.
And we did, luckily, we were able to retain several of our associate degree programs on campus also.
We were.
Including, I think, criminal justice, land resources. Forestry, and
courses that we had specific to the campus earlier and were still offering on the campus, we got to retain. And I don't remember specifically if we had any degree program that was germane only to the community and technical college, but if we had, we would not have kept that. Because there was somewhat of a drawback on, in the thought that campuses had, we had redundancy of programs, and there was an attempt to try to eliminate as much redundancy as they possibly could.
Do you believe that was pretty easy to hang on to, or was that a fight also?
I think like anything, it was a struggle. I think it was compromising, well, we'll give you this, but we're not gonna give you this, and, we're gonna fight you on this, but if you won't fight us here, we'll give you this. There was a lot of give and take, and I wouldn't say those negotiations took place in back rooms, but someone sat down at some point with a pencil and paper and went through this process, because it was detailed. But we lost a lot of money. We lost a lot of students. I think we lost the opportunity to provide some really good services to the folks in the Nicholas County area.
Mhm.
I think it made it much more difficult for them to get some of that stuff. But in the legislature's mind, and they're the ones that allocate the money, they
Mhm.
thought it was a good approach, and history will tell whether it was or it wasn't.
Well, from the research I've done, I believe that we took the biggest hit in enrollment. I think it was ended up being 35 to 40% of our enrollment.
I think we did because we were probably more integrated than some of the other places were. I think some of the other schools around the state had kept them really separate. We had actually done what the legislator had told us to do, which was to integrate them. We had started that integration process. So I think we were much more integrated in terms of courses and shared courses and those kind of things. So that when they pulled it away, we took a bigger hit because we had done more of what they told us to do. And some of the other campuses were not that far along in that process. Maybe they were smarter and had seen it coming, I don't know. Maybe they were better informed and saw it coming, that I don't know. But I know.
So we were basically all in. I mean, we went all in.
Pretty much, you know, I would say we were at least 85 to 90% in terms of trying to do what they told us to do. And then all of a sudden, we weren't going to do it anymore, but we'd already committed those people. You know, we had 20 to 25 faculty down there, you know, and all of a sudden, you lose 25 faculty. Well, I mean, that's millions of dollars in just salaries right there. I mean, we had started on the library, we had done some facilities renovations down there. You know, we were looking for ways to meet the needs of the people down there, and that all of a sudden ceased. So yeah, we took a hit, and it was a painful hit.
Well, let's talk about your presidency. When you entered in, I'll just be completely honest. I mean, from the people I've talked to, and then me being there at the time, it was a very, very turbulent time. There's things that happened. The campus had been saved, but it seemed that morale was very low. From what I remember, I'm not sure, but around that period of time, a lot of staff members had taken a cut in hours, cut in pay, somewhat, like 3/4 of a position or whatnot. So, I mean, you basically didn't have a choice but to hit the ground running. So, I mean, what did you do?
Well, it was kind of an interesting thing, as I told you earlier. I didn't plan on being president, so when the search failed and the Board of Governors asked me to serve on an interim basis, one of the things I said to them is, I'm not going to act like an interim president. And basically what an interim president does is keep the ship off the rocks till you get a new captain. And I said, we don't have time to do that because we've just gone through this crisis. We're vulnerable because we've lost all these resources. So if you want me to be the interim president, I'm going to act like the president. And until you get somebody else in here to do this. And I was in an interim state. And so I met with what I thought were key faculty, administrators, staff. We had some students involved, we got some community people involved, and we sat down and talked about where Glenville was and tried to make a determination on what was the consensus of where we needed to go. Now, from having been provost and vice president, I knew there were 2 or 3 things right away we had to do. And I knew we needed to recruit more students, we needed to retain more students, and we needed to revitalize our faculty and staff. At the time, I think we had about, I say 29%, some number in that vicinity of our faculty who had doctorate degrees. Well, for a college like Glenville, we're a laughing stock compared to our colleges, because that's not even as good as junior colleges are. So we had to improve those things to even have a chance of battling what was coming. We had to recruit more students because our enrollment was declining, because we just lost this hunk of students. We had to retain more students because we were losing half of the kids we brought in. You know, we bring in 500 kids, and beginning the sophomore year, less than 250 of them are still there. You know, what are we doing? So we came up with kind of the 3 R's, which was recruit, retain, rejuvenate, and I had a couple of little slogans, all people do, but one of our slogans was, "Good enough is never good enough."
Do you need to?
No, Sandy will get that. But good enough is never good enough. Because people say, well, that's good enough. I said, no. And I heard a lot, it's good enough for Glenville. And people in the community would tell me, I'd say, we don't have enough faculty with doctors. And say, well, that's good enough for Glenville. And I thought, no. Good enough is never good enough.
Do you think that influenced the perceptions in Charleston a great deal?
I think so. I think it probably did. If you have low expectations of yourself, other people are going to buy into that. And the other thing that another one of our slogans was, we declared Glenville a no wine zone. And no wine was whining about stuff. We said, it does no good to whine about our problems. If we got a problem, let's isolate, let's figure out what it is, let's solve it, let's don't whine about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because whining about problems keeps you from doing anything about it. Because once you whine, you feel a little bit better, you don't feel like you need to go do something. So, but we set up, immediately, we began talking to the community. I set up a series of weekly meetings with the community. And we bring them in, anything they want to talk about, we talked about. And one of the things that they were concerned about was that we were talking about doing some building, and we were cutting staff, and cutting staff time. And there were people mad about that, and they should have been mad about it. What they didn't understand was, we couldn't use these dollars any other way. These dollars were allocated. If we didn't use them, we were going to lose them.
Mm-hmm.
But we couldn't use them any other way. We could not use them any other way. So we tried to explain that, and we talked to people. We met with students, we met with faculty, we met with staff, and I basically said to them, I will never lie to you. I will not always do what you want, but I'll listen. And so we began a process. We developed a president's circle where people came in and we just sit and talk.
Mm-hmm.
And it kept me abreast of what was going on. And so I was blessed with really good people who worked their booties off. I mean, our recruitment people got out there beating the bushes. Our people who were doing curriculum, our department chairs, our secretaries, because we were working a short staff. I mean, we had people we had to let go because of the budget constraints. That's always a challenge with budgets, because the legislature sometime will cut your budget by 5%, and then you raise your tuition 5%, and they blast you in the news because you raised tuition.
Mm-hmm.
They don't point out, oh, and by the way, we did them reduce their, because it takes the same amount of money to run a campus for one student in some ways as it does 2,000 students. I mean, you gotta have the basic kind of thing. But I think what we tried to do was bring folks together and simply say, if Glenville is going to be a success, it's going to be a success because we do this working together. We can fight each other, we can argue with each other, that's fine. But when we go off this campus, let's be united. Fight, be like a family. Fight all you want to, but if someone else attacks you, you stand up and defend.
Mm-hmm.
And I was blessed that people accepted, I think, those challenges and agreed to work with us, and we got off to a pretty good start.
Okay. One thing that I documented from Dr. Powell is that he had experienced constant problems with the very first HEPC commissioner, Mike Mullen. Is there anything you'd like to say about that, or further your first interactions with him and how that went?
Well, I think Dr. Mullen was a political animal. I think he was a very bright, capable man. He'd come from a good background, but he was kind of a political animal in Charleston. So, what his true feelings were, it's hard to know. I don't think he and Dr. Powell particularly liked each other for whatever reason. But the first thing I did, the first time I met with him when I was interim president, he asked me, what can I do to help you? Which I thought was a great question on his part. And basically what I told him is leave me alone. Just don't hurt me. Don't take stuff from me. Don't badmouth me to the legislature. Leave Glenville alone and give us some time to recover. We can recover if you'll give us the time to do it. And to Dr. Mullen's credit, he did. He backed off us. He did not try to take any more from us than he did others. He didn't try to minimize us. So to his credit, he let us have a chance to recover.
Okay. And, you know, at the end of Dr. Powell's administration and during the beginning of yours, when were you officially named president? You were interim for a period of time, but...
I became interim in '03, fall of '03, and in the spring of '04, there was a search, and by this time I felt like we were moving in a direction that we could be successful, and I really didn't feel at that time like a change in leadership would be good for Glenville, and so we put our papers into that search and were named president in the spring of '04.
Okay. And from what I understand, at the end of Powell's administration, at the beginning of yours, we'd started getting some, maybe not as much support as we needed on the state level, but we had begun to get more support on the federal level. A lot contributed to, you know, as I've mentioned to you before, some contributed to Senator Byrd, but most contributed to Congressman Mollahan.
Right.
Can you talk about that some?
Well, the state didn't have a lot of money, you know, at this time. The only place there was any money, for the most part, was at the federal level. The senators were a little harder to access because, you know, they didn't come back to the state as much, and you know, they were representing the entire state and so forth. Congressman Mollahan, who represented our district, had strong ties to Glenville, and so we tried to connect with him and explain what our vision was, what we were trying to accomplish, and what we needed in the way of dollars. And he was very forthcoming in working with us on expanding the criminal justice program, for example. What that criminal justice program looks like now is directly related to what Congressman Mollahan was able to put in there. We were able to renovate Bennett Hall there and get that facility so that it really became a crime lab. And so a lot of what he did helped us there. He got us money to renovate the science building. We used some of his dollars to renovate what is now Mollahan Hall, the Student Activity Center, which was an interesting process because it was called the Heflin Center at that time. And I called Dr. Heflin, who had been a great friend to me during the time, and I said to him, Dr. Heflin, I'm in a situation that's a little awkward here. I said, I'm getting this money to renovate the student center, the Heflin Student Center, and I said, I need to do something with that. And he said, you need to name it for somebody, don't you? And I said, yes, sir, I do. And he said, take my name off of it. He said, do what you have to do. He said, I did when I was president, you do what you have to do. And so I said, I certainly appreciated that. And then I went back to the Board of Governors and said I'd had this conversation with Dr. Heflin, and I said, what I want to do is name the administration building after him. And they supported that. So I called back and told Dr. Heflin, I said, Dr. Heflin, how would you like to have the administration building named after you? And he said, I don't need anything named after me. And I said, not what I'm asking. How would you like to have the administration building named after you? And he said, I'd appreciate that. And so we were able, while he and his wife were there, to name the administration building, and he came down, and his son came down, and so forth, and we were able to do that, and that was a fun time. But Congressman Mollahan was a great friend. As I said earlier, I think it's a tragedy in a way that the state has lost his services. I don't know the new congressman, maybe he or she's doing a great job, I don't know, but Alan Mollahan was a great friend to Glenville.
Now McKinney's actually, he does have a small connection to Glenville. He's a great grandson, or I may be off on this, but of our first principal, Louis Bennett. So there is at least a connection.
Yeah, as I say, I know in working with the congressman, he was accessible to me. You can always tell who's accessible when they return your phone calls, and he always did. He worked hard. He shared the vision with us. He helped us get Vidalia money in there. That's where we were able to do the archive office because of help from the congressman and the Vidalia Foundation, Heritage Foundation there. But yeah, his federal money was extremely helpful. We could not have done many of the things that we did without his help.
Well, since you brought up the archives office, you'd spoken a little bit earlier about how you thought that the history of that campus was very important for the future. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course, maybe being a history major at one point in my time had something to do with this, but and maybe being a farm boy, you pass family Bibles along, you pass your heritage to the next generation and so forth. And one of the things I said when I came to Glenville, they had some boarded up windows, and it didn't feel good. And I thought, this just doesn't look right. And so we began to try to get some of those windows uncovered and use them for different things. But I asked, where's the history stuff? Where are the pictures of your athletic teams? Where's all of the stuff that most campuses have? And I was told it's sitting around in boxes. And I said, well, where? And they said, everywhere. It's sitting around everywhere. One of our physical plant people brought in a box and we looked down the bottom of the box, and there were the original seals from the campus. And I said, where'd you get this? He said, it was by a dumpster getting ready to be thrown away. So that sort of stuff happens if you're not paying attention to it. So it was a great interest. Dr. Powell had actually, and Mrs. Powell had actually started the beginnings of the archive office. And Sandy had started working with Irene Powell. And so when
And that was Mullan too, from what I
Mullan
understand.
too, absolutely. It's all Vidalia. And they had gotten Larry Sipo down to help us and some other help from WVU. But Sandy had a great interest in that. And so she had done some work with Irene, and then when we were beginning our work there, she got with Larry Sipo and expanded what had been done. And actually, over the time that with the next 3 years that we were there, the archive office to a vast extent was put together, was organized, was based on what Sandy did. I was a verbal cheerleader for that, but most of it's what she did. I give her great credit for doing that. But one of our slogans that we had, again, because people like slogans because they can relate to it, is I said we got to go forward to our past. I didn't feel like Glenville was honoring its past. And 134 years at that time is really something to be honored. And what we found when we began to put the old pictures out and get stuff where we could find out is our graduates came back and looked at it, our athletes came back and looked at it, It meant a lot to a lot of people. And so we tried to ferret out as much stuff as we could find that belonged in an archive office. And we had people bringing us in boxes of stuff that they'd had at their house to protect it. I thought this was going to be thrown away, so I'd taken it home with me. And they brought it back to the archive office. And, they started off in the part of a little room, and you've seen what it is now. I mean, it's expanded. But
one of my major points of interest has been digitization, basically to get access to at least the print documents out into the world. And one thing I'd like to express to you is that by having the archive and being able to have that sort of dedication, we've almost got the entire campus newspaper since 1920 up online. It gets close to 16,000 hits a month.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah.
And alumni are just extremely pleased to have access to that material.
It's a tragedy that if it was not available, because people look back on those experiences and they love to see the pictures of themselves at that point. Their kids love to see that. Their grandkids love to see that kind of stuff. It was kind of like the 50-year graduates that come every year. Dr. Powell, I think, had started that program. You would watch those people who had graduated 50 years ago, and we'd have a dinner for them the night before graduation. And we'd get out of the way and just let them stay together. They were like teenagers again. It was fantastic. it was just fantastic to watch those people 50 years ago. You see the pictures of what they used to look like. See them now, they'd all had, you know, different kinds of lives, but they remembered every bit of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, putting a gold medal on their neck for a 50-year graduate was one of the great honors that a president gets to do, you know, at that point.
Okay. Another thing I'd like to talk to you about, and then I'd like to run through some of the infrastructure improvements that you were pursuing. But I want to talk a little bit more about our supporters. You know, you can't talk about the supporters at Glenville State College without talking about Ike and Sue Morris. Can you talk a little bit about your interaction with them, some of your first interactions, and then you told me a little story. Could you tell me that again?
Yeah, Ike and Sue obviously are great assets, and people don't realize when Ike Morris came to Glenville, he had nothing. He had nothing. Tom McPherson used to tell me that he would come to the bank and they would loan Ike $100, and he'd come back and pay it in $20 increments. So he had nothing. So you've got to admire what Ike's been able to accomplish, and he's a marvelous. He and Sue are marvelous people who have the interest of Glenville at heart, and has provided resources that Glenville really could not have functioned without, particularly on the athletic side. But people also forget on the academic side, Ike's put a lot of money into that. But no, the story I was relating to was that we were thinking we knew we needed a new athletic center because the current gym and the swimming pool and stuff is in pretty bad shape. So I'd had an architect study the problem and do a rendering, and we had it framed and so forth, and I'd called Sandy Pettit, gone out there when Ike was out of the office, and had put it on the wall, and had gone around in Sandy's office when Ike came in, and you could hear him go, "Oh, what is this, you know, and then I heard him say, "Where's that president? I know he's here someplace." And so I came in and he said, "Here's a picture of your new athletic center, it looks like." And I said, "No, Ike, that's a picture of your new athletic center." And I said, "Now dream with me a little bit." And he said, "I don't want to dream with you. It costs me money every time I dream with you." But to his credit, he could see the vision of what we were trying to accomplish, and has done yeoman's work in having raised the funds for what, you know, the new athletic center and land resources building is going to be open probably this fall, you know, late fall.
Mm-hmm.
But he and Sue just have done things for the campus and have done things for the community that there's just no one else to do. There's just not those resources available. There's a fair amount of money around Glenville, but people have different focuses.
Mm-hmm.
Ike and Sue have given a lot back, and Sue served as the chairman of the board of governors for a while, and but my interaction with Ike was always positive. He was not happy when I told him I was going to leave, because I think he thought we had some work still to do, and I think we probably did to some extent. But he was very supportive. Lost a lot of weight now. I see pictures of him in the paper, and he looks pretty thin. But marvelous supporters of the campus. Lucky to have those folks.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about infrastructure. As you said, even when you took over, I mean, Dr. Powell had made great strides. There have been a lot of things overlooked previous to his administration, potentially just because of funding issues. You know, no one's really to completely blame for any of that. But yeah, when you assumed the presidency, there were still, you know, several, you know, buildings that potentially should come down, things that need repaired. Could you talk some about that and more in depth?
Yeah, what we tried to do was look and try to prioritize what needed done, and the list was long. You know, we needed a new residence hall because our tower down there was sliding off the hill, and only one wing of it was air conditioned, and it was kind of tough to take parents in there and let them see where their kids might be living. So we looked at a new dormitory process and didn't get very far with that. The Heflin Center at that time, the student center, we did renovate with money that we got from the congressman. That needed done badly, and now we have a beautiful facility there. The state had allocated money, about $5 million for a new science building. Well, $5 million won't buy you anything. And we were that had been allocated several years before, and the timeline on that money was running out, so we had to do something with it. So we got additional dollars, and we wanted to build a new science building, but we couldn't get enough money to do it, so we decided to renovate the old science building. And something which wound up costing about $10 million time we got through doing it, but now we have a beautiful science building, which was one of the interesting things that happened there, and that we knew we had asbestos because it was an old building. We should have thought we had mercury, but we didn't think about mercury, because in the old days, people played with mercury in their hands, and it fell on the floor, and somewhere during one of the testing things, they found mercury vapors. You would have thought they found a nuclear weapon. We had guys in hazmat suits coming in there that made everybody leave the building, wouldn't even let faculty take their clothing out of the building, cleared it, locked it down, until we could get a little reason and sanity in there. It was the darndest thing I'd ever seen. I mean,
So there's wooden floors, I believe,
yeah,
wasn't there?
yeah, in some places. Well, either that or it had linoleum or tile over the top of wood floor. But, you know, mercury gets down there, it gets hot, it does oxidize, so we knew we had some oxidation. But I didn't realize mercury was that big a deal. It was a big deal. Wound up costing hundreds of thousands of dollars to abate that. But we began to work on the library, and then, on the science building. We started working on the library to change the library. The
The
library.
setup of the library was outdated.
It was outdated, and structurally, it didn't let us do what we needed to do. You know, we needed more computers, and at that time, we had computers stuck up on the end of the building, where maybe 3 or 4 students could go work. So we didn't have a lot of money. We had about $500,000 to do the work with, and so we brought architects in, and they all said, "Oh yeah, we can do these drawings and so forth." And then we opened the bids on it, and the lowest bid was like $1.2 million. So we fired the architects and decided that we'd do it ourselves. And so the library renovations, for the most part, was done by our physical plant staff.
Now, I actually moved every book
Did you?
and almost probably 3/4 of shelving.
Yeah. So you know who did the work.
Well, I can't take credit for how it looks, because
Yeah.
the physical plant did do a wonderful job
They did.
on the renovations.
They did, but that was the only way we figured we could do it within the scope of the money we had. But we continued to need a new resident hall. We continued to need other buildings. And again, you don't want to tear down buildings just because they're not used anymore. What you'd ideally like to do would be keep the facades and renovate them inside so that they're functioning. But some of the structures at Glenville were so old you really couldn't do that. I would have much rather dropped the science building and put a new science building up, just because we needed a different footprint for what we wanted to do in science there, but we couldn't do it. So you do what you can do, and sometimes that's good and sometimes it isn't. But what I tried to do, Jason, was to say we need campus facilities that are worthy of our students and our faculty. Because I didn't feel like our facilities were worthy of our faculty and our students. We wanted our faculty to look at these facilities and say, "This is a place I can work. It's a place I want to work." We wanted our students to look at it and say, "This is a place where I want to go to school." And I didn't think they could do that with what we had. And if you're going to recruit, you're recruiting against people who have those kind of things. And why would a student come to Glenville when they could go to Fairmont or to, West Lib, or any number of places they could choose? So what we tried to do was, as I say, get facilities that were worthy of our faculty and worthy of our students.
Okay. Let's talk about a couple things that you listed on your survey that, the second thing that you'd listed was you didn't get all the renovations completed that you'd wanted to. How do you feel about where we've gotten?
I think Dr. Barr's done a tremendous job. He's certainly got a new residence hall, which he needed. He's got another classroom facility there that he's needed, and he's continued this new athletic center. I'm sure he's had a tremendous hand in doing that, along with Ike and a bunch of other people. So I think the things that we were able to start, Sandy and I and the other people we were working with there, I think Dr. Barr has grown those, and I think has probably expanded, on them. I think he's done a good job in that area, certainly. the campus looks quite different than it looked, I'm sure, when we were there.
Okay. Let's talk about the fact that you'd mentioned that you thought that Glenville would have been served well with a graduate program of some sort.
Well, to me, a graduate program is a logical progression of a vibrant four-year school. When we moved, and I give Dr. Butler, Kathy Butler, and the department chairs great credit, but when we began a recruitment process for faculty where we moved from about 29%, and I think when we left it was up close, it was in the 70s someplace.
Mm-hmm.
If you get where you've got 70+% of your faculty have the terminal degree, then you're in a situation where now you look like a college. Potentially
highest in the state.
Yeah, potentially that.
Mm-hmm.
So you look like a college, and the natural progression of that would be a master's program of some sort. And the logical choices were criminal justice,
mm-hmm.
which we did start doing with Carnegie Mellon. We developed where Carnegie Mellon was offering the master's degree, and students took, courses on our campus, and we had their faculty sometime two-way interactive video, and
mm-hmm.
Sometime coming home to campus and vice versa. So we were doing that on a cooperative basis, but education was the next logical place where that would have been, and I would like to have seen us gotten a master's degree in education that we could have offered the folks of our area.
Mm-hmm.
Teachers, and we have a wide area there with a lot of teachers, they really don't have the facility after working all day to get in their car and drive an hour and a half or
mm-hmm.
2 hours to someplace. And in West Virginia, you have to drive an hour almost to everything,
mm-hmm.
which is, it's a beautiful drive, so it helps. But I thought we needed a master's program in education. I think could have supported the master's program, particularly once our faculty got its credentials up to snuff and so forth. I hope at some point that'll happen.
So you do believe that the demand would be there?
I think it would be.
Maybe if we just didn't go too far with too many different programs.
Well, I think you have to do it very carefully. I think you have to have one program in a high demand area, and the most high demand area is usually early childhood, because that's where most of the teachers are. You have smaller classes and so forth. So either a specific master's, I think, in like early childhood, or a general master's in education curriculum or something that could be across several areas, I think would probably be a pretty good choice there. I don't know if the current vice president and provost has looked at that. I know Dr. Butler did when she was vice president.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get a lot of support from the state at that time when we talked to them. But times change and so forth.
Okay. Well, so I don't take your entire day here. Is there anything that you would like to add before I ask my last final questions?
I think it's, people have said some nice things about us for our time in Glenville, and we appreciate that. I mean, that's real special to us. But I think whatever we gave Glenville, it gave us more. It was just a real special time. Great people, community, faculty, students, staff. Staff is probably the unsung heroes of Glenville.
Mm-hmm.
But just a very special time for us. I mean, Sandy and I are grateful for having had the opportunity there. So maybe just say that.
Okay. Is there anything you would attribute to why, I hear that a lot, that people, in West Virginia, or specifically central West Virginia, a lot of times in higher education stand out compared to any other institution that people have worked at. Is there anything that you contribute that to?
I think it's a unique community, and part of that I think is the isolation of it. It's in the center of the state. It's not buffeted by lots of people along the periphery of the state as some of our sister institutions are.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when you're isolated, you tend to develop some commonalities because that's what you see every day. very special graduate. I mean, you can see the characteristics in that person. And I mean, I see graduates of Glenville down here in West Virginia, down here in North Carolina,
Mhm.
every now and again. It's 100 and, what is it, 40 something years now, I guess. Time is getting us scattered on me. There's probably 140 something years now that the place has been.
141, this is
141 years,
141st.
okay, 141st year. You've had an impact on so much with that number of years. I mean, there are Glenville graduates in places that we don't have a clue where they are. And what they're doing there is they're taking those Glenville traditions, those values, and maybe it sounds old-fashioned, but those values are very important. And they're being good people out in the world. They're good citizens out in the world. They're making the world a better place for having been there. And if you can do that, that's unique. Not that other people don't do it, but I think Glenville does it a little bit better
Mhm.
than some other people do.
Okay. From my speaking with Dr. Barr, I really do think that this. I'm assuming that I think he's may stay another 2 years, and that's just an estimate. I know that most presidents don't want to really comment too much. You did pretty much supportive of Dr. Barr completely. What advice would you give to Glenville State College's next leader?
Well, I think certainly build on what has come, look back and see what Dr. Barr did well, what Rob Freeman did well, what they didn't do so well. Look at the vision that the campus has when you're coming there. You need to take the campus's vision and go forward with it. You don't need to impose a vision on a campus. That's going to be disastrous. If you bring a vision there and say, here's where I want to take us, what you have to do is develop that vision cooperatively with your people. I think that would be terribly important. And I don't know what that is now. I've been away from the campus for 7 years, so I don't know what all of that is at this point. Dr. Barr would have a much better view of that and the folks who are there. But understand, whoever the president is, you work for the campus. You work, for the people. They don't work for you. Now they report to you.
Mm-hmm.
You supervise them, you evaluate them, but you work for them. That's your job. And the job of everybody who is employed by the institution is to provide the best education you can possibly do, for those kids who come through that front door. If you keep that focused, what your function is for those kids and what your role is on the campus, I think the rest of it's easy. I'm simplifying it, I'm sure. But if you're going to be successful in that role, to me, those are the attitudes you have to have. Because if you demonstrate those attitudes, because people are going to watch you.
Mm-hmm.
I learned very quickly as president, you have to be careful what you say. I looked out my window one day and I said to Teresa Stearns, who was my executive assistant, I said, the grass is getting a little high out here, isn't it? 15 minutes later, they were cutting the grass. And I went in and said, Teresa, what is it? She said, well, you said the grass was high. I told them to cut it. I said, no, don't do that.
Uh-huh.
It was not my intent to say, go cut the grass. I was simply making an offhanded comment.
Mm-hmm.
I learned you can't do that. So I think the next president should feel good about themselves, either him or her. Maybe it's time for Glenville to have a woman. I don't know. There's certainly some outstanding women who are out there. So I think that's possible. But just, you got to be confident in what you can do. You've got to understand that what you're there for,
Mm-hmm.
and who is there to work with you. You got to value them, because ultimately, if you don't value your people, you're out there by yourself. And the presidency isolates you enough as it is. You don't have that many peers when you're there. I mean, you're the only president in town. You don't have anybody to sit down. You can't go have a beer with somebody because you don't want to be seen drinking, because people say he drinks all the time. So you're isolated. So you really, I think you have to be comfortable with yourself. be focused, be willing to work 24/7, because that's what you're going to be asked to do. It's good to have a good partner. I was blessed with Sandy. She was, and with Ellie the dog. There's no way I could have done that by myself. She was ears and input that I didn't get anyplace else. She would hear stuff I would never hear. She would see problems I never saw. She would see places where I needed to look at that I would never have seen without her. And so you can't do it by yourself. I guess a person do all that, they'd be great.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to do this, sir. And I especially want to thank you for your service to Glenville State College.
I appreciate it, Jason. It was my privilege, buddy.